When it is your turn to give testimony, your name will be announced, and I will ask you if you would like to have your video enabled while you speak. If you do wish to have your video enabled, we will do that, and your line will be unmuted, and I'll indicate that you have the floor. If you don't wish to have video enabled, that's fine. We'll unmute your audio, and we will receive your audio testimony. We will ask you to restate your name and tribe affiliation and title as you begin your testimony. If you are a tribal leader's designee, then we ask that you also state the name of the tribal chief or chairperson on whose behalf you are offering testimony this afternoon. Thank you for reconfirming this information for us so that we can include it in the record of this event. We also welcome written testimony from tribal leaders. Please send your written testimony to us by email no later than February 4th. The email address is the OVC Tribal Set Aside at ojp.usdoj.gov box, but you don't have to write that down because my colleagues are putting it in the chat for you here so that you can connect with us that way. Again, that written testimony will be due by February 4th, please. And I want to reiterate that if you would have any technical difficulties understanding us speak, making yourself understood, using the features, please let us know by chat so that we can help make sure that you are able to fully participate in the consultation this afternoon. We do have a formal opening for our consultation this morning, and we are in the midst of working out the technical arrangements with Mr. Randy Cornelius for the Oneida Nation, who is going to open us with a prayer. However, while we are working on those arrangements, I have the honor of introducing the Director of the Office for Victims of Crime to make some opening remarks. Christina Rose was appointed to the position of Director for the Office of Victims of Crime by President Joe Biden and sworn in on July 12, 2021. Prior to her appointment, Ms. Rose spent nearly 20 years at the U.S. Department of Justice, serving in numerous roles, including as Deputy Director at OVC, as Acting Director and Deputy Director for the National Institute of Justice, and as Chief of Staff at the Office on Violence Against Women. Dr. Rose, we are so glad to have you today. Thank you for opening the session.
Thank you, Catherine. And hello, everyone. It's an honor to be with all of you here, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing from Mr. Cornelius, who we will listen to if the technical difficulties work themselves out as soon as I'm finished. I'm going to briefly recap my remarks from yesterday for those tribal leaders who are participating today but were not here yesterday. As the Director of OVC, it truly is an honor to be with you today in this government-to-government setting to talk about the future of the the Tribal Victim Services Set Aside from the Crime Victims Fund, or as we like to refer to it as the Set Aside Program. President Biden has instructed the federal government to conduct our relationships with tribes with the intention of building a new era in nation-to-nation engagement. This administration's work is rooted in the President's respect for the unique nation-to-nation relationship, commitment to the country's trust and treaty responsibilities, and the desire to strengthen tribal sovereignty and advance tribal self-determination. Kimberly Woodard, on my staff, prepared an excellent framing paper and an FY21 set-aside program report in preparation for this consultation. In case you haven't seen those documents, or if you want to refer to them again, the locations will be put into the chat to the right of the screen in just a few moments. These two documents are thorough resources, so I will only briefly cover the history of the set-aside program to set the stage for our consultation today. The Office for Victims of Crime has learned a lot through our engagement with the tribes, through consultations and listening sessions, and we have been diligent about acting on what we've heard. In FY20, for example, OVC implemented several improvements based on feedback from tribal leaders, including establishing a tribal division, which is now led by Catherine Dark-Schmidt, with staff dedicated to administering the Tribal Victim Services Set-Aside Formula Grant Program and other tribal grant programs. Implementing a formula for dispersing tribal set-aside funds. And this was done in response to past tribal consultations, federal advisory committee meetings, listening sessions, where tribal leaders expressed a strong preference for doing it this way to ensure that tribal set-aside funding was distributed using a formula rather than a competitive program. And lastly, offering Tribal Victim Services Set-Aside Program applicants the flexibility to be able to choose an award period between 12 and 60 months, an option that is unique among OVC's discretionary programs. It was designed to address tribal leaders' concerns that a 36-month period did not adequately meet the needs of the communities. So I'm going to start at the place where I'm talking about in FY21, the set-aside was authorized at 3% of the Crime Victims Fund for a total of $132,050,000. We don't have a budget yet for fiscal year 22, but we do anticipate that the amount set aside for this program will probably be similar to the 2021 total. And under this non-competitive formula program, federally recognized Indian tribes, their authorized designees, and tribal consortia consisting of 2 or more federally recognized Indian tribes were eligible to apply for tribal set-aside funding. We made 133 tribal set-aside formula awards totaling $112.6 million. That total represents every dollar that every eligible tribe or tribal designee or consortium requested from us. These funds will provide critical victim services to more than 200 tribes. It's important to note that the tribal set-aside is not a statutory program, a statutory formula program, I should say, meaning Congress didn't create a formula program when it authorized the tribal set-aside funds. Therefore, while OVC chose to administer the funds non-competitively using a formula, we are still required to adhere to the federal statutes governing discretionary grant making, notably 200 CFR Part 2. This part of the code outlines how federal agencies must administer discretionary grant programs, including the oversight of budgets, collecting certifications by grantees regarding lobbying, and other issues. As we seek ways to streamline the oversight and the administration of set-aside grants, we are still bound by these federal statutes. For FY22, we propose retaining many of the features of the FY21 set-aside formula program, including the non-competitive distribution of set-aside funds based on a population-driven formula. Number 2, a 2-phase process that allows us to calculate grant awards based on the number of tribes that plan to apply. 3, a self-determined project period of 12 to 60 months. 4, a self-certification of tribal population numbers based on the population the tribe intends to serve under the tribal set-aside program. And number 5, offering applicants the option to complete a program checklist on their own or participating in an interview with OVW Tribal Division staff in lieu of submitting a traditional 25-page program narrative. Finally, and most importantly, we want to be sure that everyone understands that all federally recognized tribes are eligible to apply for FY22 set-aside formula funds, regardless of when you last received set-aside funds and regardless of the project periods or any remaining balances that you may have. So here's how the FY22 set-aside program is going to work. In phase 1, tribes that intend to participate in the set-aside program will submit population certifications. The population certification form is already available to you on our website, and it can be completed online and submitted to us by email. These certifications must be submitted by February 15th, and I'm very happy to announce that we have already received some of those based on our consultation yesterday. Once we've received the population certifications in hand, and we have a budget from Congress, we will run the formula to allocate the available FY22 set-aside funds to the participating tribes. We don't know how much the set-aside will be this year, just as a reminder, because we don't yet have a passed budget from Congress. OVC staff will notify tribes of their allocations, and then the Phase 2 process will begin. In Phase 2 of the process, tribes or their designees submit applications into OJP's Just Grants program. Our staff process the applications, and awards will be made in FY22, in the fall. We look forward to receiving your testimony today about the two issues that have been identified in the framing paper for this consultation: your experiences with applying for the tribal set-aside program in FY21, and your recommendations about whether OVC should expand the scope of the set-aside program to permit grantees to construct facilities to provide victim services in future fiscal years. As always, we welcome your comments and your recommendations on any other topics related to OVC's tribal programming, whether it's the needs of your communities or any other issues related to crime victimization in Indian country that you believe should be addressed by the Department of Justice. Catherine, I will now turn it back over to you to queue up our testimony from our tribal leaders and tribal leader designees. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Rose. And I am honored now to be able to introduce Mr. Randy Cornelius, who will open our session today. Mr. Cornelius is an Oneida Nation tribal leader and faithkeeper for the Bear Clan located in Oneida, Wisconsin. We are honored that Mr. Cornelius will be presenting the opening prayer today to open the consultation. He has been working with the Oneida Nation for 34 years and has more than 37 years of independent and academic study of the Oneida language, culture, and history. For the past 25 years, he's been with the Oneida Cultural Heritage Department, and he spent 10 years as an Oneida language and cultural educator with the Oneida Language Revitalization Program. He is also currently the Oneida Language and Cultural Archivist and has spent his career collecting stories of the people of the Longhouse, including the Oneida. He has a strong background in the interpretation of ceremonial language, linguistic terminology, and contemporary history of the Oneida Nation. He graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay with a major in psychology and double minors in human development and Native American studies. Mr. Cornelius credits his success in life to his wife of 40 years, their son, and 5 grandchildren. Mr. Cornelius, please begin when you're ready.
So good is what great. They have got Tani and get the Bagis Wagin and Wagit the lot on Ayo de Aga, Nebogadu from Jot, Tonkuan, Koknake. They were Unguli on those that are to go in agree. They eat and Bokali Dakwan and Dakimanakwe and Nekotoko. They got gone and Ladina Dunkwan and Uhadun the river too. They can a hella dunksla. They because between they got gone a nothing at Waterley. They Ludin Sony, they Yungoli Hot. They got nothing at Waterley, they got logic Nule, Tando Dassa. They did nothing in Oliva, and you went to Lolage. They because quickly or Tanunia, they did you wait again. Upper Gwynny Green, then you go at the loan again, they got garden when it's slot. Then the Gospel Queen, then Wagat Tunde, they did noon in you want to go slaya, they the Gospel Queen, they told Ganolu, and one. The I swell again, they I dwatted land ha, that Queen, they just sold in and on tunes and they loaded the cooler. na ko kuini kui ne saha nen ahunda dagalidad ahunda galidade ne jikaya ne ga hojira yanduze ne ga no lu ne thona awane da shulge hai to je lande ne beto no hula du ne ga tokko ji ha ga ku ne hoskana ne ni gono tuni ta tuni tu hak ne ko ni ko hadauna nen hai go manisa de ne ji nu ne ni ko sita kaslako ne yukino ha ne huncha ne da gaspiki ne ga ka ne la welu ne ayuki ni go hioste ne go chukna teso ne to sokot kaslado sokoi pose ne da gaspiki ne la welu ne jingwai pikan hosla nen ang kahake ne hoda ne tunu da gaspiki ne ka ni ka hawi nen yundolista ne yukino ha ne huncha ne hoda ne tunu ne ganyo yo tali hana das ko wala wale ne hoda ne tunu da gaspiki ne yatu bani slage ne na iyo ko tundake ne aze agudun hizuna ne jinate ne juhekwa ne hoda ne tunu da gaspiki ne ko da 300 se go you ne to hadis ne jinate to sukut kasla do hokali sukoin toze ne jinuni ko se da kasakwa da huska jia to hoinuni ne ko ne gola and I tino wala do kinu ha en hunja jisego yo do batanji to haki da 22 hak ne ko ne ko de hoda ne tunu ne ganyo nen wa hasne ji hunja de hoda ne tone ene genen hole wa kashungwa de to wasaguli hoda nen lodi yo en lodi ho wanaze de hoda ne tunu de ka speak ne lonu ha ne hoskan e hodi na wagu de ji nahte yo nahtanji to hakise ne ji nuni ko si de ka stakwa ne hoda ne tunu de ka speak ne ndi ko ta 300 jisego ne lonu ha nen lodi nen lona de watanji to hakise ne ji nahte ne hosako ego lai dide ada hasule ge uska ji ai to ho nuni ene ko ne gola ne da speakui dai tino wala do ne gelo ho bana ze ji se ko no la de watanji to haji ta toni to hapen ko ada ona ne ai to bani sa de ne ka ne tiga ne gui ne ka kan kai ni hanung koi tak ne to da se ne na ta de hunja de ne sung koi diso ne ne ti thadi da je ji ni ko no tiste de ne te bani sla de ne te basunda ke ne to tum kiya wi he ne ji ne chi ne lo lo ne ni ko ni ko da ha ke ne hoda ne tunu de to speakui ne lo no ha ya te bani sla ge ho kali wata sun ne te basunda ke ne yuki ne gula la ke ne un ko ina ka ne ka to hunja ke di ngo de wi ha jis ne hoda ne tunu de to speakui lo ha ne tot ko ne la di ni gula ne jo bi lo ndung ne da ka kui so ji ne hun ka bi lunde ne hoda ne tunu da ka speakui uska ji ai do ho ni ne ko ne gula ne dai tino wala do gai ne hanu ko da ke ji se go ne lo na de watanji to ha se ta toni to ha ne ko na ne hai ko ni hala ne ji ne ta da hun ja de ne sung go ya di zo ne hoda ne tunu da ka speakui ne lao ha ne ho ha lo ne ya unka ne na ho yan de li ha ke ne ji ne ta da hun ja de ne ji le se ne ga to ne hun ja ge ti ngo de bo ya ha se ne ho ha lo ne hoda ne tunu ne unko ke ne yo guli wa gunyastu ne ji na de sungo awe ji ngoli hoda ne da perspekui ne lu ha ne ayende li ha ne ji nu nan ta de jat ne oda ne junkia wi he ne junkoi tatsu do na he ne ga to hun ja ge di ngo de bo ya ji se ne ya ke di bo nu de ne do na he ne ga to hun ja ge da shul ge ne lo lu ne da perspekui ayun ko te nyanda ne ji le ndoli wat ko ni ne ayuki ni go hioste ne hoda ne tunu ganda lusla ne hoda ne sa ne ga ka ne go no kosla ne ga ka ne ji ne lo ne ni ko ni ko da ha ke ada haswele ke uska ji ai do we no ni ko ni ko ne da tunu hola do na sung ko de zo ne hole bo ko ne lo ne down ta tonu do ha ni ko ni go ada haswele ke ko ne ga ne ji le ne bo ko ni ne ga ne la donksa ne ka ta oknu ne dungo dokta ne wat ko dana ge tat ku to knati su ge ni ko ha ne has ko dele ge ne ho ne tunu de to speak ne no hunis o hunis ne bo ge o ne ta on hat se ne na ka ta ti ongoing, one sa, patuk nates, nates, subawi, jini goli hoda. Because Queen and Bogari Yanda, Nejinole and Bogari what Queenie, Netununi Wage, Tartoni Duak, Neniquanico. Adana, then Hungary Yanda, then Dungli what take it. Neji Nate, Nen or Giro, then going with Net. They hold on it to know that the Queen is Panicula, Neji Yochi, you got Nicolo Dahagi, Tartoni Duak, Neniquanico. So, what we commonly call the Haudenosaunee, or they call them the Six Nations or the Iroquois, is that the custom that we have is whenever we come together as people, is that someone is asked to speak on everybody's behalf to acknowledge everything in creation. And this is a custom that our people have always done, and it's a constant reminder to us of how the Creator had it intended for our minds to be, is to be conscientious of all the things here on our Mother the Earth. And so first of all, that we acknowledge all the people that are here, and that we're fortunate that they're able to be here to gather, and that we have that peace within us. But at the same time, we know that there's this calamity that's going around the world today, and it's causing a lot of suffering. And so we ask those families that are affected that their minds do not go too far down into that depths of darkness, and that after a few days is that they become active in their communities. And so those of us here that have our health, our well-being, is that we extend the greetings that thankfulness and that, to the Creator that we have that, and that's how our minds shall be. And so from there, we acknowledge all the things here on our Mother the Earth, all the things that He planted, and all the things that He placed here, and that He intended for us to have a good mind towards all those things, because we look at them as family. We have the same nature, all the plants that are out there, the animals, the birds, even the bugs, all those things here on the earth. The Creator made all those things for our well-being, and that is what that will sustain us. And so we extend our greetings, our thankfulness, and our love to our Mother the Earth, because she's the one that upholds all the sustenance of life, and everything depends upon her, especially us, the people, and that she's still carrying on her responsibilities. And so we extend that greetings, that thankfulness, and love to her, that she's still carrying that on. And then from there, we direct our words to the sky world and what we call the greater forces. So all the things here on the earth, the plants, the animals, the birds, the waters, is that we acknowledge all those things here, and we turn our direction to the sky world. And they were given responsibilities as well, just like everything here on the earth, to work hand in hand with our Mother the Earth, and in order for life to continue on. And so we acknowledge what we call the winds, our thunders, our grandmother the moon, our elder brother the sun, the stars. All those elements, they play a part in order for life to continue on. And so we're very fortunate that they're still carrying on their responsibilities. And so as one mind, we come together as one, and we extend those greetings, those thankfulness, and that love out to each and every one of them, that they're still carrying on their responsibilities. And then we turn our directions to the four messengers. These are celestial beings that travel back and forth for the land of our creators. And their responsibility is to watch over us and to provide us with insight, the messages. And they come to us in various forms. They can come to us in our sleep or in a vision quest or our opportunities. And they're around us day and night. And that they were given that responsibility to work hand in hand with the winds as well, so that they don't get too windy. And if that was to occur, then there would be suffering. And so, as one mind, we collectively come together and we extend our greetings and our thankfulness to the four messengers, the celestial beings, that they're still carrying on their responsibilities. And then lastly, we acknowledge our Creator, what we call Sungoyat Diesel. And that means that He's the one who created all of us. All of us is the things that He created and put here on the earth. And people, we were the very last things that were created. And He told us that we don't know how many days that we're going to be here. And so that we try to our best to always have a good mind, to always be compassionate, and also to carry that love for everything here and each other. And He also told us that He gave us our ways, and that if we follow that, we walk that path that He intended for us to walk, is that when He breathed that last breath, is then that we will know that was like His world, the spirit world, the land of the Creator. And for the duration that we're here, the mission that He gave us is to fulfill our responsibility. Each and every one of us has a purpose in life that we're intended to carry out. And while we're here, during that time, we'll never know what that world is like. But it's our mission to fulfill our purpose in life, so that when we do breathe that last breath, then we'll know what that world is like. And so together as one, we bring our minds together and we extend our greetings, our thankfulness and love to the Creator for providing us with all the sustenance of life and giving us, each and every one of us, a purpose in life. And that's how our minds shall be. And then the end of the speech has to do with acknowledging that this is the best we're able to do. If that may be something that got dropped off, or I forgot to acknowledge something, is then that I ask for that forgiveness, and that I'm learning. For a long time I've been learning about our ways, our language, our teachings, and so I may have forgotten something. And the reason we do that is to acknowledge that we are the most imperfect thing in creation, and it's also to remind us to be humble. And so we do that because we don't want to offend the natural world, because they hear, they see, they smell, they can taste, they have all the same senses that we have, but in their own way. And so when we do this acknowledgement, spiritually, they're being honored. And so if we forget something, that we have, and so we let the world know that this is done to the best of my ability. And so this is as best I'm able to do at this time in translating what I had said, and then the meaning behind as well of why we do this. And so this is how our minds should be. So that's the end of it.
Mr. Cornelius, we are so grateful to you for opening our consultation in a good way and for sharing your traditional words of welcome and opening with us, and especially patience as we got our audio issues worked out so that we could hear you. Thank you for the gift that you gave us. We are now ready to begin receiving testimony, and our first speaker today will be Wanama Dixon of the Traditional Council of the Poma Band of Louis Senior Indians. Dr. Dixon, do you want us to have video enabled while you speak?
I'm trying to find the button to press for that.
Mike, Daryl, do we do that for Dr. Dixon, or do you do it?
What we'll do is move you to the panelist section, and then it's at that time that button will appear and you'll be able to enable your video. It'll just take a few moments to transfer you to that section.
Cool. Oh, start video, it says. Do I hit that?
Hit that, and we are ready when you are. Thank you very much.
Hey, there I am. You can see me?
Yes, can see and hear you.
We can see and hear you. Thank you.
Right on. So I can just go ahead and start. How's that? You know,
That's perfect.
I thank you for the opening. It was certainly was wonderful to hear and put us in a good place. And the words I want to share with you are coming from our task force, as you know, the NCAI Task Force on Violence Against Women, Office of Victims of Crime and Crime for this consultation. And in this, on behalf of the National Congress of American Indians, as you know, being the oldest and largest and most representative American Indian Alaska Native organization dedicated to protecting the rights of tribal nations. When we when we look at that, that has a long history, as you know, and the practice of self-determination, uh, uh, achieve self-sufficiency as well. I thank you for this opportunity to provide this written testimony. As my name is Wanamaho Dixon, and yes, I do have many degrees behind my name because I had to do that in order to be recognized in the outside world of my tribe in terms of a statistician and academic. But as a traditional counsel to the Pama tribe, part of the clans have this representation to hold steady our relationship with you as sovereign to sovereign. Representing NCAI is also acknowledging that as being a part of the Palma Band of Luiseño Indians and the co-chair of the NCI Task Force for the Violence Against Women, and as well as the task force addresses the Department of Justice. But we want to thank you for also hosting this important tribal consultation on tribal victim services. Working with the Tribal Nations Leadership Council, this has come up a couple times, as you know. And in doing this work, uh, Tribal Victim Service Set Aside Formula grants, the TVSSA, and you know, just learning those acronyms, as you know, is like another language, right? Just enjoying it. But we brought a new influx of life-saving resources to tribal nations that can be used to assist the American Indian, Alaska Native crimes victims of crime. And knowing the importance of this new and necessary funding cannot be overstated, as you know. It is important. It's the importance of this new funding to be, I think, echoed out to Indian country to utilize, collaborate, work with. Yeah, as tribal nations working together to ensure that all the funds reach American Indian, Alaska Native victims in Indian country. That becomes paramount. Funding cannot be overstated. As you know, to achieve this goal, there must be an ongoing government-to-government consultation, which is why I thank you for doing this, between tribal nations and DOJ to determine how the TBSSA formula and programs can be modified, strengthened for use in future years. In light of this, the Inside Task Force recommends that DOJ take the following measures to be improved: the tribal victim service set aside formula grant, and but first provides a context for those recommendations. And so doing, as you know, the historical considerations, traditionally Native women were respected and held sacred within their nations, and order was maintained within the tribal societies and communities if crimes did occur. They were dealt with swiftly, which is very, very true. And and that is essential to understand and know that we have that going on. But one of the things I realized in listening to you how colonization eroded the sacred status and dehumanized our Native women. Devalued Native men, removed our children, stripped our language, and we were required to denounce our living our way of life and from practicing our culture to become a citizen of the United States. Imagine the trauma these demands have had on us as a people. We have had many traumas imposed upon us from cradle to grave. The current spectrum of violence against tribal societies and our communities is intertwined with systematic barriers embedded within the federal government. These barriers developed as the United States seized homelands and natural resources of American and Alaska Native peoples, forcibly removing and relocating our relatives, American and Alaska Native peoples, at times perpetrating violence against our American Indian Alaska Native people, creating living conditions and culture was unacceptable, victimizing especially our American Indian Alaska Native women. To fully address and prevent further inhumane injustice, it is imperative that we look at the Crime Victims Fund as applied to tribal nations. We must truly correct myself here, dive deeply into the historical issues that have given rise to where we are today. Disproportionate violence against women and missing and murdered Indigenous persons is a crisis. The highest rate of suicide, especially among young males, greater than the demographic and grossly underfunded justice supported service systems. We cannot expect to be given access to resources in a way that does not allow us to create the systems that we need to build, that are necessary for infrastructure to create comprehensive and holistic systems. We need to freshly look at what costs are allowable and unallowable, given the trust responsibility that the federal government has to the tribal nations. OVC must recognize that tribal nations are best positioned to know what is needed in their societies and their tribal communities, and respect the sovereign right of the tribal nations to self-determination, as they respect the sovereign right of state governments to self-determination. The NCI Task Force appreciates OVC's consultation framing paper and the recognition that some previously unallowed costs for non-tribal programs be reevaluated for tribal nations. We agree that funding should be expandable to include major renovations and construction. However, they should not require a separate grant application process. The NCI recommends that allowable costs should be expanded to include supportive services to address the crime and support comprehensively and holistically the victim as determined by tribal nations. Meaningful consultations by each federal agency is paramount to strengthening and developing and sustaining such needed social services, economic services for American Indian and Alaska Native peoples and tribal nations. Meaningful consultation is essential to adhere to the government-to-government relationship between the United States and each tribal nation. Meaningful government-to-government consultation requires minimum, I would say, accurate notice and optimum scheduling, opportunity for tribal nations significantly participating in consultation process. And I want to add to that during these times when you're also doing your subsistence living, the hunting and gathering times are different, and they can be impacted on how you participate because you're doing the gathering for your nation. So it came to a conversation with us tribal leaders who do that. But I wanted to add that just so you know that when we look at the ultimate scheduling, it can be a part of that. Proper notice should be provided as early as possible, ideally 120 days, from the date of the consultation. In this instance, tribal nations provided a Dear Tribal leader letter dated December 13, 2021. However, the distribution suggests that it was through the OVC Justice Grants portal only, with very few tribal nations, resource centers, or coalitions aware of the OVC consultation until the beginning of the new year, with mere 2 weeks' notice. And through the Indian grapevine and Indian news, talking leaves and everything, we got the word out. But once again, it goes back to that ultimate time of 120 days and using the plethora of what is federal that reaches out to federal governments to inform them. When you consider that, when possible, written testimony should be allowed up to 60 days following the consultation. Until the beginning of the, it used to be like you had like maybe 2 weeks, Let's make sure that it's 60 days. The Dear Tribal letter with written comments are due less than 30 days after the consultation. Not enough time. Coupled with scheduling right before the holiday break, tick in active COVID-19 cases and all the other versions of what is COVID, and the many related issues that travel nation and governmental agencies face. This time frame is not respectful to tribal nations. It will not solicit the desired responses from tribal leadership that OEC is seeking. We all understand that these timelines may be difficult given the timeline for the grant cycle. As discussed below, we strongly encourage OVC to develop a regular schedule for consultation, annually or semi-annually, that will allow sufficient notice to tribal nations. And as also providing an opportunity for federal policymakers to get input when policy decisions are to be made, which could be considered at this time as well. When you look at these things and get that input, the task force, the INSIDE task force, strongly recommends extending the written comment deadline for this tribal consultation to March 15, 2022, to accommodate the 60-day submission deadline. To honor the government-to-government consultation process, each federal agency must consult with tribal nations, including the scheduling of consultation to avoid scheduling conflicts. For instance, last summer, OVC, OVW, and FIPSA scheduled consultation within 2-month period that conflicted with subsistence hunting, fishing, gathering times for many tribal nations, making it difficult for tribal leaders to attend the events, as I kind of stated earlier. Appoint a standing working group of tribal experts to improve the TVSSA program. Ongoing consultation, consistent input from tribal nations is imperative to ensure the success of TVSSA programs. As we have recommended in the past, the NCAI task force urged the DOJ establish a working group of tribal experts to help guide, develop of the TVSSA program and provide input on pragmatic decisions on an ongoing basis. In the evolution process, what happens then as we come into this, there's a youngness to us because we didn't do this. It's not us being young, it's just the knowledge and interaction with one another. So let's do this. Let's make this happen. And commit to the government, OVC to commit to government tribal consultation program moving forward. Had there been a standing working group, there would have been regular meetings at which tribal subject matter experts would have provided input regarding the challenges tribal nations experience. The working group should have also helped OVC frame the issues for this very consultation in standing consultation. The NCI task force again recommends that OVC appoint a standing working group of tribal experts to improve the TVSSA program and commit to regular tribal consultations on the program. Parity with the states. Well, COVID-19 has devastated the entire country. Tribal nations, American, Indian, Alaskan victims have been particularly hard. Several tribal nations have been unable to utilize and expand their TVSSA funding as originally intended during the nationwide pandemic. The DOJ should be flexible in improving no-cost extensions to tribal nations upon their request in order to allow the TVSA funding to reach out to their people. On July 22 in 2021, President Biden signed the VOCA fix to sustain the Crime Victims Fund Act of 2021 in a historic effort to stabilize the Crime Victims Fund. Among other provisions of the law, the Attorney General was given the authority to provide no-cost extensions to Victims of Crime Act and award recipients. Despite the new authority, tribal nations were still required to submit a request for extension and show good cause for communities already under-resourced. While at the same time, state programs received an automatic no-cost extension under that authority. You and I both know, when you look at that and you know that it's on paper and it's documented, it was wrong. The parity is not there, and now it's documented very succinctly. These clearly unequal requirements demonstrate the lack of parity in discretionary funding, dissipate treatments, process different from the state programs. Tribal nations are required to have different needs, priorities, and values to go above and beyond what is expected of our state counterparts. OVC should provide justification for additional burdens placed on tribal nations and remove the additional burdens and criteria that are now not imposed on the states. There's some thinking in that. It's not to take away what your thinking was about that, but the parity isn't there, and that needs to be righted and additionally fixed. And it's a record of, you don't want a record where you just did this wrong. And in our eyes, it is, as tribal nations. When we look at that, we hear the states, we're going, what? Maximize the TVSSA program flexibility by deferring to tribal nations' view of what constitutes improving services to victims of crime. Many tribal nations create and support holistic services for their citizens. However, placing any prohibitions, anything to contravene or interfere with that is not the intent. But if the funding and the description of funding and how it should be funded and spent and used doesn't provide that working knowledge, it becomes prohibitive. And one area of victim service creates an imbalance in the system that can result in the lack of justice, which runs counter to the program's purpose. The TVSSA should also allow for tribal-defined supportive services, including court service, prosecution, the cost of holding the perpetrator accountable, other measures that provide holistic, comprehensive program to systematic changes. And that's pedagogical. That helps affect change within the society to do better for their people and themselves. A victim may need medical care or counseling, but they also need someone to answer that 911 call. How can a victim heal knowing that the perpetrator has not been held accountable? In tribal communities and societies, victims need functional systems that create an environment where true healing can take place. Drawing an arbitrary lines between types of service simply is not working for our tribal communities. We need the flexibility of self-determination to put the resources where they are needed. The funding may be made available to improve victim services in tribal communities and societies through FY18, FY19 appropriations bill, had the potential to transform the crime victim service infrastructure in tribal society or communities, bringing healing and support to victims who have long been forgotten. But sadly, these grants fell short. The funding got caught up in bureaucratic red tape. And I know you know what that is, but for the record, we have to say this. And some of you are going to help greatly and have. But let us be honest, this wasn't necessary, but it happened. Caught up in the bureaucratic red tape, and the tribal nations surrendered. Far too many tribal nations could not conform to OVC's unnecessary, ill-fitting demands. Together, we must do better and reimagine this program for this vision to be realized. However, DOJ must administer the funding in a way that works for the tribal communities that funds are intended to serve. We need OVC restrictions removed from unallowable costs for tribal programs to maximize extent permitted by law, and a program that allows us to direct funds where they are needed most to be comprehensive and holistic. OVC's decision to reevaluate its prior decision to disallow new construction is a good example of the increased flexibility tribes need. OVC should similarly identify every other restriction that is resulted of a policy decision from non-tribal programs and be as flexible, innovative, and broad as possible within the law. We must provide victim service support more broadly. A victim of crime is not just the sole person that was victimized by an incident. There are multiple layers of secondary victims, from the child who was present when his mom was beaten, to the husband who was trying to help his wife overcome the desperation of rape and does not have the to support her. There are many other scenarios that can be described related to this concept. In addition, we know that many of our parents, grandparents, and other ancestors were required to go to boarding schools, were victimized. And if they returned home, they were never the same. The harm from the boarding schools is not recognized by OVC, but arguably anyone whose ancestor attended a boarding school should be eligible for OVC funds service within the defined parameters. Often overlooked in this area of law providing support services of crime are the multi-generational impact of being victimized as a people again and again, and the impact it has had on the family community, and the tribal nation. The way the OEC grants are administered do not consider the need to go back further in time to acknowledge who is a victim. This must change to achieve this comprehensive victim services. Consultation questions: which, if any, of the barriers to complete the Tribal Victim Service Act program application can OVC help you overcome it? OVC must approach the program with a broader perspective of who is the victim and what are allowable costs. Colonization has had a devastating impact on us, has almost eradicated some of us. Tribal nations never had the resources to address holistically, comprehensively, how to approach the wrongs committed against us. Fund the program with the approach of self-determination and recognize the tribal nations how best to know best what are the tribal community's needs. As described, question 2 above, OVC has implemented several changes to the application process, adopting a distribution formula offering applicants alternatives to traditional program narrative requirements. To streamline the TVSSA application process, what additional steps can OVC take to make the application process less burdensome? Adopt a formula similar to the BIA formula that allows tribal nations to administer the money according to their needs, so that they can go to multiple tribal agencies that address the program in different ways. From the courts to the health clinic to the youth center, they can all use these funds to help victims of crime rather in the present day or historically. What kind of service in question 3 of technical assistance might applicants need to prepare phase 2 of the Tribal Victim Service Funds program application? System streamline the process so that tribal nations are placing money in categories and part of their regulatory governance, budgeting a process to determine where OVC funding should be used in what program. Remove restrictions or non-allowable costs that might be relevant to a non-Indian community that just aren't applicable in tribal societies and tribal communities. Should OVC allow the cost of new construction of buildings for uses as shelters, transitional housing units, other structures to extend that these would be used to meet the needs of crimes with future TVSSA programs? Anticipating FY 2023? Yes, OVC should at other ways open up for needed services, support, redefine allowable costs for tribal nations that should not require a separate grant application. This measure should be accomplished through the standing working group recommended today. Should OVC issue a separate competitive solicitation for tribes that are interested in obtaining TVSSA program funding to support the construction of facilities, shelters, transitional housing, child advocacy centers, etc.? What are the practical barriers to completing the construction of victim service specific facility on trust lands that OVC should be aware of as plans for this policy change? No, OVC should not issue separate competitive solicitation for construction of a facility. OVC should move away from solicitation, should work with the BIA on a mechanism where tribal nations can opt in for OVC funding, identify in general terms how the money will be spent. What is the realistic timeline for completion of a construction project on trust land? When FEMA land study bids for construction and materials, the pandemic and shortages of materials, there should be flexibility with the construction. While timelines should be identified, it should be flexible for the extensions. Department of Housing and Urban Development has processes that OVC can examine as often tribal housing authorities provide the construction or project management for these types of projects. B, what challenges might a grantee who uses TVSA program funds to construct a facility encounter with long-term facility maintenance? Having a line for maintenance of facilities should be part of the budget process. The rainy day fund is needed for common maintenance issues as well as the increase in natural disasters as a result of climate change that impact communities every year. Many of the things I've stated to you today are going to be written and handed to you and will be shared on our website and available through ncai.org. The task force, our subject matter expertise, have gone through this and seen this. We will continue to work with you. You are stepping in the right direction. Let us continue stepping in that direction. The task force thanks DOJ and OVC for their work to ensure tribal nations are able to access this life-saving funding in a flexible manner to best support American and Alaska Native victims and their tribal societies and communities. We will submit written comments for the record and request that OVC will extend the comment deadline to March 15, 2022. I humbly thank you for letting me express these words on behalf of the nations we represent and those who have worked in this work with you and continue to do so. Joan, all my relations.
Councilwoman Dixon, thank you very much for those remarks, and thank you in advance for giving them to us in as well. I appreciate all the effort that has gone into preparing those detailed comments. Our next speaker will be Chief Mike Williams of the Akiak Native community. Chief Williams, do you wish to have your video enabled while you speak?
Hello?
Chief Williams, do you wish to have video enabled while you speak?
Yes.
All right, we're going to move you into the panelist room so that you will have the option of turning on your video. Your audio line is live, and we invite you to begin whenever you're ready.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can very clearly. Thank you very much.
Yes, my name is Michael Williams. I am a son, brother, uncle, husband, father, and grandfather with responsibilities to love, protect, provide, and care for our families here in our community. We are one of the 229 federally recognized tribes in Alaska, and we will provide the written testimony over to you by the deadline. The Akiak Native community is a small community, a small community in Western Alaska, and we have been existing here. Here, and I'm also representing the Alaska tribes with the National Congress of American Indians as area vice president. And also, I have worked in the mental health field for a long time, and started these programs to recover from all of the bad things that are happening in our communities. So, so I think it will really help us to further recover with this with these programs. And first of all, I was to congratulate OVC and staff for their work in administering this program. TVSA has brought a new influx of life-saving resources to tribal nations that can be used to assist Native victims of crime. We appreciate how OVC has considered our input as tribal leaders and have modified the administration of program accordingly. The Crime Victim Fund has been in existence since 1984, and tribes only recently have had direct services since 2018. During this short time, we recognize that policies created mostly for states do not work for tribes, especially small tribes who may not have the infrastructure to even begin creating a program within the existing parameters of the TVSSA. Tribes need the flexibility to address the needs for their communities and victims' needs. Tribes tend to create and support holistic services by placing prohibitions on areas of victim services, creates an imbalanced system that can result in lack of justice, which runs counter to the program's purpose. The TVSSA should allow the tribally defined supportive services, including court services, prosecutions, the costs of holding the perpetrator accountable, and other measures that provide a holistic, comprehensive program to systemic changes. A victim may need medical care or counseling, but they also need someone to answer if they call 911. Again, how can a victim heal knowing that the perpetrator has not been held accountable? We understand that OVCP may read these comments and think, we agree, but that's not our job. But we ask you to step outside of the typical bureaucratic silos that think about the needs of victims. The mission of OVC is to meet the needs of victims. In tribal communities, victims need functioning systems that create an environment where true healing can take place. Drawing arbitrary lines between types of services simply is not working for our communities. We need the flexibility of self-determination to put the resources where they are needed. Alaska-specific recommendations. Number 1, fund an Alaska Native-based TA provider that has knowledge and the boots on the ground understanding of the needs, barriers, available resources, and logistics, not just cultural representative from national TA provider to provide TA, especially with allowing construction. Our situation in Alaska is much different, and we need an organization that understands our issues. We waste so much time educating on our needs that our needs are often overlooked and not fully addressed. Number 2, we need to increase the cultural activities that will promote and increase traditional ways of learning values, family and community connections, and self-worth measured in doing for others and community members. The culturally based connection, self-worth, and sense of
Just going to give a few more moments for the audio and video to come back, if you just bear with us momentarily.
Manner. 3, to do all of these things, each tribal community must be allowed the ability to design victim and community-centered programs that directly address the needs of those harmed as well as those committing the harm. The victim of crime is not the sole person that has victimized by an incident. There are multiple layers of secondary victims, from the child who was present when his mom was beaten, to the husband who is trying to help his wife overcome the desperation of rape and does not have the tools to support her. There are many other scenarios that could be described related to this concept. In addition, we know that many of our parents, grandparents, and other ancestors who were required to go to boarding schools were victimized, and if they returned home, they were never the same. The harm from boarding schools is not recognized by OVC, but arguably anyone whose ancestor attended boarding schools should be eligible for OVC funded services from defined parameters. Often overlooked in this area of law, providing support for victims of crime are the multi-generational impact of being victimized as people again and again, and the impact that has on the family, the community, and the tribe. The manner in which the OVC grants are administered do not consider the need to go further back in time to acknowledge who is the victim. The NCI task force has urged the DOJ to establish a working group of tribal experts to help to guide the development of TV SSA program and provide input on appropriate programmatic decisions on an ongoing basis. Had there been standing working group, there would never been on the regular meetings at which tribal subject matter experts would have provided input regarding the challenges that have been identified thus far and helped with the proper framing the issues within the framing paper as one example of a benefit. We recommend that OVCP appoint a standing working group of tribal experts to improve the TV SSA program. Next, as to your questions, should OVCP allow the cost of new construction of buildings for use as shelters, transitional housing units, and other structures to the extent that these would be used to meet the needs of crime victims with future TVSSA program? Yes, housing is a huge problem for all tribal members, but especially for victims of crime. In addition, with global warming, our villages had to move buildings and locations. We urge you to look at other ways to open up the needed services and support redefined allowable costs for tribal communities, and this should not require a separate grant application process. This measure would be accomplished through advisory group recommended herein. Number 2, should OVC issue a separate competitive solicitation for tribes that are interested in obtaining TVSSA program funding to support the construction of facilities, shelters, transitional housing, child advocacy centers, etc. A, what are the practical barriers to completing the construction of the victim services specific facilities on trust land, which are very limited in Alaska because many of our lands are fee simple lands that are being managed by Alaska Native corporations, and many of the tribes do not have. We have trust lands, but we have very limited amount of trust land, and that OVC should be aware of as it plans for policy change. We urge you to move away from solicitations. Look at the BIA self-governance model and develop a mechanism where tribes can opt in for OVCP funding and identify in general terms how the money will be spent within the defined areas. B, what is a realistic timeline for the completion of construction project on trust land? With FEMA land studies, bids for construction and materials, the pandemic, and shortages of materials, there should be flexibility with construction. And while one should be identified, it should be flexible for extensions. The housing urban development has processes that could be looked at, as often tribal housing authorities provide the construction or project management for these type of projects. In Alaska, we have very narrow window of construction and transportation of materials to our village. The costs are very high for labor, materials, and developing the land. The timeline should be approved as proposed and extension allowed. C, what challenges might a grantee who uses TVSSA program funds to construct a facility encounter with a long-term facility maintenance? Having a line of maintenance of facilities should be part of the budget process, and we should be allowed to keep in savings. The rainy day fund is needed for the common maintenance issues, as well as natural disasters that seem to be experiencing more of each year with devastating impacts. As to your second question about applications process and tribes not completing both phases, I ask you to consider historical trauma impacts on the community. We ask you to open up the definition of what an allowable cost is. The Administration of Children and Families described historical trauma as something that can be traced back to first contact and the treatment of Native Americans throughout history. As a young boy, I was sent to a boarding school to attend school. I left a loving family and primarily spoke my native language. I arrived at the boarding school, and I can only describe as a military school must have been like, and as a veteran, I know what it's like. My hair was chopped off. I could only speak English and be punished, and I was alone. I looked around there and the kids as young as first and second grade at the boarding school. They looked lost, and I worried about them and tried to look out for them. Fortunately, I had a solid foundation and I survived the experience. But without my own hardships in life that I had to overcome. As a mental health counselor, I try to help my community members heal. It was hard. We have far too many suicides, substance abuse, and few resources. We didn't have these issues prior to the contact with the non-Indians. After 3 years, I changed careers. I was burned out. Historical factors and trauma need to be reviewed in the OVC allowable costs. How historical trauma impacts individuals and communities is challenging to quantify and identify. However, nonetheless, we all know that it has an impact on where the communities are today in the disproportionate rate of violence, substance abuse, and suicide. Among our young males, suicide is 3.5 times higher than any other cultural group. Sadly, American Indian and Alaska Native communities have experienced more oppression than any other group in the last 100 years. We need to address this trauma so we can heal. We need to be able to create the programs that can address these wholesale crimes against our communities and the negative impacts that have resulted, including the disproportionate rate of suicides among American Indian and Alaska Natives in general, and especially among our young men. However, as the regulations and policies now stand, OVC does not recognize the impacts of intergenerational trauma and allow for services. This is a prime example of serious oversight concerning the administration of programs within the administration and different approaches that tribes must navigate. In closing, I thank our American Indian brothers and sisters from South 48 who stand in solidarity with us to elevate the injustices Alaska tribes have faced as national issues for immediate resolution. I thank the federal officials with us today for listening. I really appreciate this time and thank you for listening to me, and I will be submitting the written comments to you before the deadline. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chief Williams. We appreciate your testimony today. Thank you again, Councilwoman Mahel Dixon, for your remarks that started us off this afternoon. At this time, we do not have other tribal leaders or tribal leader designees in the queue to speak. And so we are going to prepare to close the consultation. And we will do so first by welcoming back Director Christina Rose to make some closing remarks. Following Director Rose's remarks, we have a formal closing to conclude the afternoon. Director Rose, when you're ready.
Thank you, Catherine. I do want to offer a special thanks to Mr. Cornelius for opening up our consultation and honoring us by his participation. I want to thank all of you, those who spoke and those who listened. Thank you for your testimony today and for your candid remarks about how we can best work together. Most of all, thank you for the work that you do to support victims and survivors. And thank you for helping to make your communities safer and healthier and stronger. We know that tribal communities have been hit very hard, not only by the pandemic, but by the unrelenting crime and victimization that continues. We are all taking the necessary precautions to keep our families safe, and we all hope that you all are doing the same to keep your tribal communities safe. And we hope it will be safe to hold the Indian Nations Conference as an in-person event in December of 2022, and that we can all be together by then. You've honored us by sharing your stories of need and the stories of resiliency in your families and communities. And we recognize your steadfast dedication as leaders committed to the dignity, safety, and well-being of your communities. We are so proud to be partners with you in making sure that victims of crime in American Indian and Alaska Native communities have access to the services that they need and that they deserve. Before we close, I want to thank Catherine Dartschmidt for moderating our consultation today, and I want to thank the OVC Tribal Division for their preparation and participation in making this happen. I also want to thank our contractors from Leidos and Saxman One, who helped us to carry out this consultation, and we couldn't have done it without you, so thank you. We are grateful to everyone for the expertise that they brought to the table today. So thank you again. I wish everyone good luck and good health. And my understanding is we have an official closing to this afternoon's consultation, which Catherine will introduce. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Rose. Even a year and a half into the pandemic, we are all navigating on how to make a consultation work effectively over a video platform. And so I'm going to do things a little out of order. Forgive me for this, but I want to make sure that we are having representation and testimony from folks who have taken the time to join us. And I understand that we may have either First Chief Robert Walker of ANVIC on, and that after that we may have a statement representing Chief Pitka. So Daryl, can you see if we can get Chief Walker lined open to give testimony? Director Rose, we're going to proceed through these next two, and then we will check in again about whether it's time to do the formal closing. Thank you for your flexibility.
Yes, Catherine. So I guess first, Janelle Chapin would like to speak on behalf of Chief Pitka, a statement that she would like to read. So if we want to start with Janelle Chapin, then we will work with getting Chief Walker on. He's on the telephone line right now, so we're unable to designate what line is his, but we'll work behind the scenes if you want to go to Janelle Chapin first.
Thank you. I am grateful for you working behind the scenes. Ms. Chapin, we are going to open your audio line. If you are present by video, would you like to have your video feed open as well?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. That's going to take us a second here into the panel. So your line will be open. You can turn your camera on the bottom of the screen. Thank you for your patience, and we are ready for your testimony.
Good morning, and thank you. Sorry, I wasn't set up. We just found out that Chief Pitka was quarantined this morning with her family, so she asked me to read her statement for her. So I'm reading this on behalf of Chief Rhonda Pitka of the Village of Beaver. Beaver is located on the north bank of the Yukon River, approximately 60 air miles southwest of Fort Yukon and 110 miles north of Fairbanks. It lies in the Yukon Flats National Wildlife Refuge. The population of beaver is mixed Athabascan and Yupik Eskimo. Their economic subsistence driven relies on moose, salmon, bear, and waterfowl. Sorry, I have a cough. The lack of fish returning has had a big impact on their community this year and in the years past. And the winters have been extreme, with the temperatures as low as 60 below. This year they've had rain, which has worsened the winter. My oral testimony, I'm going to read it in first person, sorry. That's how it's written. My oral testimony today will focus on the questions you have had within the framing paper and related considerations after I share what I believe to be important for our communities. We appreciate the work that OVC and our staff have done in getting this tribal program up and running. These funds have provided much needed services, and we appreciate all the assistance that has been provided. We appreciate how OVC has considered our input as tribal leaders and have modified the administration of the program. However, I have noticed for this event, the notice for this event was short, not timed well given the holidays, as we recommended that you allow for written comments through the end of February at the very least. As you are probably aware, recent studies show, such as the National Institute of Justice research report on violence against American Indian and Native women and men, document the dire safety circumstances that Alaska Native villages are in as a result of their unique geographic situation. One startling statistic is that 38% of Native victims are unable to receive necessary compensation to 15% of non-Hispanic white female victims. I would like to talk about the need for more education about what is allowed under the program, with a broader conversation about disallowable costs and about how we can meet the needs of our communities. The current crisis and spectrum of violence committed against American Indian and Alaska Native women is a result of systematic barriers created and continued through historic law and policies of federal Indian law. Many tribal nations in Alaska and throughout the nation lack the necessary infrastructure to create standalone grant systems that can be supported by an administrative body. Some of the states in which tribal nations are located do not have the necessary systems in place. So how can tribes who have had to band together to protect their communities be expected to provide services in a limited fashion, leaving many other critical needs unaddressed? For example, in Alaska, many of us have no advocacy services, law enforcement, 911, or state offices to file a complaint. Given the separation of geography, language, and culture, when a crime occurs, tribal leadership, social services workers, or family members are the first to respond, preserve evidence, and provide victim services. The role of three agents of these agencies, the jurisdictional, oh goodness, I'm sorry, give me 1 second. The jurisdiction boundaries in Alaska create extremely dangerous conditions for the small, remote communities. How can tribal nations be expected to create victim services in isolation of other needed services and programs to address the crime itself, to just conform to what is allowed by OVC? How do they effectuate change without addressing the underlying issues? While Alaska Native compose approximately 19% of the state's population, according to a 2017 report from Alaska Crime Justice Commission, 46% of all reported felony-level sex offenses involve Alaska Natives. While tribal governments to address, I just missed a whole sentence. While the situation for Alaska tribal nations may be extreme, it is an example of the varying needs of tribal governments to address the disproportionate violence that sadly burdens our tribal citizens. Tribal nations cannot be given restrictive guidelines for funding a very narrow class of victims or related issues as prioritized by bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., who have an abundance of resources available should a crime occur. We have many victims in our approach to treat the entire community from the victim to the perpetrator. How else will the community change? The need is great, and tribal nations need the ability to fully access in our terms what is needed and how programs should be developed. Tribal authority must be respected to create what is needed and to adequately serve tribal citizens. These recommendations will be developed more further below. While we will address the questions in the framing paper, we will also provide input about the following in general in its existing format. The underfunding of tribal justice systems has resulted in the loss of lives, high rates of criminal victimization, underdressed trauma for generations of victims. Most recently, the BIA submitted a report to Congress estimating that to provide a reasonable base level of funding to all federally recognized tribes, $1 billion is needed for tribal law enforcement, $1 billion is needed for tribal courts, and $228.8 million is needed for detention. We are not aware of a similar estimate of need for traditional victim services. Based on recent appropriation levels, the BIA is generally funded tribal law enforcement at about 20% of the estimated needs, tribal detention at 40% of estimated needs, and tribal courts as dismal as 3% of estimated needs. In Public Law 280 states, the tribe has virtually no BIA law enforcement presence or funding for courts and law enforcement other than what is appropriated from year to year, essentially providing no sustainability or safety. For federal agencies to assume that tribes should conform and operate similar to state programs does a disservice to the victims. Alaska-specific recommendations. 1, fund an Alaska-based TA provider that has knowledge and boots on the ground understanding of the needs, barriers, available resources, and logistics, not just a cultural representation from a national TA provider to provide TA, especially with allowing construction. Our situation in Alaska is much different, and we need an organization that understands our issues. We waste so much time educating on our needs, and that our needs are often overlooked or not fully addressed. 2, we need to address the increased cultural activities that will promote and increase traditional ways of learning values, family, community connections, self-worth, measured in doing for others and community members. This culturally based connection, self-worth, and sense of value as a contributor will reduce incidents of harm. When harm is done, the victim is more likely to seek help from within the community, and the community will have the tools and knowledge of how to address the victim and the person who has done the harm. The community is empowered and able to adjust the situation in a holistic, caring, and healing manner. Our tribal community must be allowed the ability to design victim community-centered programs that directly address the needs of those harmed as well as those committing the harm. 4, we lack law enforcement, requiring many hours and sometimes days to respond, especially in rural, remote communities. Even in medium-sized towns and surrounding areas, help gets delayed, while law enforcement has to figure out which agency has jurisdiction. What good is victim services if we have no one to call about the crime and no one to enforce the crime? 5, the chronic lack of housing, safe housing, and shelter in all communities, large and small, creates a dangerous and traumatic situation of victims having to be in the same vicinity and sometimes same household as the perpetrator. This leads to the victim and children being forced to relocate, often to one of the hub communities where they have very little support, no family, and can easily fall prey to traffickers, homelessness, addiction. Need victim services throughout the state, not just to victim's home community. 6, OVC needs to increase the cultural activities that will promote and increase traditional ways of learning values, family and community connection, self-worth measures, and doing for others and community members. This culturally based connection, self-worth, and sense of values as a contributor will reduce incidents of harm. When harm is done, the victim is most likely to seek help from the community within the community and has the tools and knowledge of how to address the victim and the person who has done the harm. The community is empowered and has the ability to address the situation in a holistic, caring, and healing manner. 7, to do any one or all of these above, each tribal community must be allowed the ability to design victim and community-centered programs that directly address the needs of those harmed as well as those committing the harm. There are 2 victims, the ones who have been harmed right now and the one who is responsible for committing the immediate harm, who has learned the behavior with past harm done to them. Those that have hurt have unhealed wounds. And then the third victims are those that have heard, saw, or lost stability from the situation. National recommendations. The NCIA task force has urged the DOJ to establish a working group of tribal experts to help guide the development of the TVSSA program and provide input on programmatic decisions on an ongoing basis. Had there been a standing work group, there would have been a regular meeting on which tribal subject matter experts would have provided input regarding the challenges that have been identified thus far and helped with properly framing the issues within a framing paper as one expects of a benefit. Is one example of a benefit. We recommend that OVC appoint a standing working group of tribal experts to improve the TVSSA program. Next, as to your questions. 1, should OVC allow the cost of new constructions or buildings for use as shelter, transitional housing units, and other structures to the extent that they would be used to meet the needs of crime victims for future TVSSA program? Yes, maximum flexibility should be provided to address the needs and the flexibility and reflect the housing difficulties that victims have had in remote areas and harsh weather. We should be able to do whatever is necessary for victims and allow for short-term solutions. 2, should OVC issue a separate competitive solicitation for tribes that are interested in obtaining TVSSA program funds to support the construction of a facility? What are the practical barriers to completing the construction of a victim service specific facility on trust lands that OVC should be aware of as it plans for the policy change? No separate solicitation. The funding should use a self-governance model to allow so much for victim services and to allow the tribes, once given funding amount, to provide a budget of where the funding will go: healthcare, mental health, housing, etc. The BIA self-governance model could be reviewed and similar approaches used for victim services. B, when is a realistic timeline for the completion of a construction project based on trust land? Costs can be very expensive. Construction can be limited to Alaska, thus need the greatest flexibility whenever possible. You've heard many of the challenges that we face when our constructions, with our short construction season, and the need for additional supplies and costs as those supplies are needed. C, what challenges might a grantee who uses TVSSA programming funds to construct a facility encounter with long-term facility maintenance? A maintenance plan should be part of any construction proposal. The second set of questions would be answered in a general manner. OPC should utilize a tribally based view of all the activities that would improve services to victims of crime as set forth in the FY 2020 Commerce, Justice, and Science Appropriations Bill, which provides for the TVSSA. Different tribal nations would have different needs, and TVSSA funding must be flexible enough to meet these needs. Additional needs of the American Indian, Alaska Native victims differ significantly from non-Native victims based on location outside of Indian country. Congress enacted the TVSSA to rectify a long-standing inequity between tribal nations, state and tribal governments, OVC must respect the sovereign rights of tribal nations to self-determination as they respect the sovereign rights of state government to self-determination. While the non-Indigenous communities may not have the needs associated with systematic and historical victimization that American Indian and Alaska Native communities do, and we do have the ability to address these needs in adequately funding tribes and recognizing the self-determination authority and creating culturally appropriate historical services, the OV funding is a way to achieve these through comprehensive victim services. In closing, I would like to thank all of you for your time and attention. Alaska tribes have faced as national issues for immediate resolution. Anabaset.
Chapin, thank you very much for being able to step in at the last moment to provide Chief Pitka's testimony. We are grateful that you were here and able to do that. We are going to walk in by phone. We need to two Chief Walker. So there, if you can open the two lines. Chief Walker, if you speak to see if we have correctly identified your line, just give us a sentence or two.
Line 11 is unmuted. Chief Walker, is that your line, sir?
This is Robert Walker, yeah. Are you calling me?
Got it in one.
Okay. You can hear me. I can barely hear you guys because you're cutting in and out. Something to do with our weather, I think.
Can hear you, Chief Walker. Please proceed when you're ready.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate you giving me this time. I was kind of running late on other things I had to do, but everybody has excuses every time we have to do something. Thank you for offering me this opportunity to testify. Good morning. My name is Robert Walker. I'm the first chief of the native village of Anvik. This is my home. So our community and Anvik tribal citizens' well-being and safety are a priority for me and our tribal council. The Anvik tribe is a Degaton and Athabascan community with a rich history. We are located on the west bank of the Yukon River in the interior of Alaska. Excuse me. We are an isolated tribe with 392 enrolled members and less than 100 members living in our traditional lands surrounding Anvik. Access to Anvik is by small boat, small plane, snow machine, and barge. That's pretty much how we have to get into Anvik, providing with the weather. At this point in time, we have no law enforcement. We have a vacant position for a VPSO, Village Public Safety Officer, which is funded through the state, and positions continue to be vacant. Anvik did have a COPS grant for a tribal police officer, and it was filled until they respond to a domestic violence call went terribly wrong. Fortunately, no one was harmed, but there was no backup for this incident. Only the chief and tribal administrator had to step in. Our TPO resigned because of the fallout that call. From that call, he was concerned for the safety of his family. So again, we are back to the drawing board to provide basic public safety to our tribal members. State Troopers Naniak posted Naniak, a hub community located 1.5 hours away by airplane, are responsible for responding to calls in Anvik and the surrounding villages. The state has 3 troopers on call for 46 villages. The weather marks travel in and out of Anvik often impossible for days. This means law enforcement is not able to get to the village for much of the year due to the weather. This is not a new situation. The COVID-19 pandemic has added another layer of conditions that impact our community since March 2020. There has been no regular flight service to the village of Anvik because of airlines that was daily provided with twice-a-day service went bankrupt because of the pandemic imposed restrictions on travel. So, and that was what they call Raven Air that did this, and it really left us in a hard spot there because we didn't have, Anvik does not have a health aid, and the nearest provider in Aniak Vessel, which is 1.5 to 4 hours away by airplane. This created a dire situation, made much worse during a global pandemic. COVID-19, with the increased potential for widespread community infections and no means of health care or ability to test or to even quarantine, create extreme dangers for every person in our community. The Anvik village has imposed local mandates to help stop and spread, but efforts are hampered by the lack of housing. And that's one of the issues that was brought up not only now, but time before with the state and the federal government, which as families living together, quarantining has been very challenging. This bad situation only becomes worse when someone is being victimized in their home with no local safe house, no transportation to get to a shelter. Their space can be found in a regular shelter, no health care provider, and no law enforcement safety is not available in our community. Alaska is a PL 280 state. Thus, tribes share jurisdiction with the state government because of the federal and state laws, policies, and allocation of resources, including the Department of Interior's prior policies not to fund tribes in Public Law 280 states. Tribal response has been throttled, leaving the investigation and persecution of policy of crimes, including violence against women, are truly health, safety, and welfare issues, and such assistance is required by the federal trust responsibility. Just last summer, we were finally certified that a 2012 rape case and kit was finally tested and the perpetrator identified 8 years later. Crimes like this have a huge impact on communities' feeling of safety. Now, just to reiterate a little bit about this incident happened 9 years ago, and all of a sudden it just came to view that they found a perpetrator because of this. And this was really amazing because it was all long forgotten. And all of a sudden the Alaska State Attorney General made some calls and notified the proper people on what the procedure happened, and they did find a perpetrator who lived out in the lower 48. So this was pretty interesting, but it was a long time, and it was pretty much with this. It just really opened up another thing for us. Alaska is a PL 280 state. Thus, Indian tribes share jurisdiction with the state government because the federal and state laws, policies, and allocations of research include the Department of Interior's prior policy not to find tribes in Public Law 280 states. Tribal response have been throttled, leaving the investigation and prosecution of crimes, including violence against women and children, to the state. Also, like the federal government, has failed to provide for public safety in Alaska Native villages, according to the tribal law and other commission reports. About 40% of our communities lack law enforcement. Many villages' crimes go unpunished as of today. We continue to share with you in hopes that you will understand the unique condition that exists for our communities in Alaska that demand we be creative in providing a local response. We would like to address several issues at this time and respectfully submit our concerns and recommendations. The testimony yesterday really focused on what OVC wanted to hear about a true government-to-government relations regard an agenda-raised issue that we import to our communities. And this is something that we always have to really have to learn to work with, because government consultation with our tribal council, with the BIA, the BLM, the Forest Service, the FEMA, all these coincide with what has to be with a government consultation, because if we don't do this here, we're going to be lost. And this is something that you have to look at, and as look at the BIA, that I am a product of also this high schools out in Salem, Oregon. So this is something that Mike Williams did bring up, and I understand that being taken away from a home and brought to a new foreign place is very, very traumatic to live on. President Biden, in his first year, reaffirmed that EO 13175 consultation policy and created his own in the Executive Order 14053, entitling and recognized the importance of listening to tribes and survivors as to what will work. Quote, he stated, my administration understands what Native American people, particularly the survivors of violence, know best what their communities need to make them safer. Consistently, engagement, commitment, and collaboration will drive long-term involvement to our public safety for all Native Americans. So I'm just glad that Mr. President has made a statement on this to where it could be brought forth and be recognized by the federal government. The Crime Victims Fund program has been in existence since 1984 and was created for the state and federal victims of crime that are very different from who we are and what our needs are. Tribes, especially small tribes, do not have the infrastructure even to begin creating a program with existing parameters of the TVSSA. The structure of the program may be appropriate for states that have numerous resources available to them that tribes do not, and in some cases never will. Tribes need the flexibility to address needs to their communities and victims' needs. No victim can receive justice if there is no emergency response available and no system in place to accountability for the perpetrator who committed the crime. Our recommendations are, as I speak here, number one, the TVSSA will allow for tribal defined support services, including court services, prosecutors, the cost of holding the perpetrator accountable, and other measures that provide a whole-state comprehensive program to systematic changes here. Two, OVC should utilize a tribal-based view of what constitutes activity, and there would be improved service to victims of crime as to set forth in the FY 2020 Committee Justice and Science Appropriations Bill, which provided for the TVSSA. Different tribe relations will be different needs, and TVSSA notes funding may be flexible to meet these needs. Number three, we urge the Department of Justice, DOJ, to evaluate the overall grant program and are open to use CVF. For example, states have been able to place victims coordinator staff with law enforcement. C2, for example, the OVC Law Enforcement Based Victim Services and TA program. So these grants solicitations include tribes, but fail to recognize the tribes located in the public 280 states may not have law enforcement and have arresting authority. This goes back to how we discussed earlier about the BPSO, the Public Safety Officer, and also the TPO or Tribal Police Officer, which in eligibility requires of the grants so far, Tribes located in Alaska and California, 229 and 109, respectively, and those in the 4 other mandatory states would be ineligible to apply for these grants. More than 1/2 of the tribes in the nation who are already under resources. These tribes need more help, not less. We have been included from many programs from the federal government. Number 4, in addition, a large number of states use their CBF funds for child welfare programs, such as court appointment special advocates, CASA, child welfare programs, and other meaningful programs. The child welfare programs are hugely understaffed and underfunded, yet there is no target education for information for tribes and how many programs could be utilized. Many tribes do not realize that their child welfare program can be funded through the programs we provide education from above. How to, and just to add to this too, watching this grow over the last 10 years that we have worked with this, and every tribal village has its ups and downs. People come in, people move, we train people, and they find better jobs when, and this with our TFYS, it's one of the things too that we have trained a lot of people, and we have lost a lot of people because of these issues that we're not paying enough money, we don't have enough funding, and this is really, where do we go with this? I mean, you look at our programs, most of them are based out of Anchorage, Fairbanks. How many do you see based in the hub? Bethel, Antioch, McGrath? And this is something that we have to deal with here. And I know that working with these our health providers, Yukon Custom Health Corporation, YKHC, and they have issues here too. But we are like 2 hours away. By the time they get here, they have to schedule them. They have to, like 2 days later, then they'll show up, and they'll only be here like half an hour because of their flight time, and their plane is down to so many hours because in rural Alaska, all aircraft have a time limit for the day, for the week, for the month, and the pilot's hours. So these have to be justified somehow where we could get more time, more work done, because we are on an off-road system. And just as like I said, aircraft is our taxi, and a lot of it is our travel. So I thank you for your time for this right here. And I know I use time a lot of times. Some of you guys, it's past your lunchtime. So thank you very much. My name is Robert Walker Hernandez. Thank you.
Walker, thank you for your time. We are glad that you gave us testimony today. We are going to break until 4:15, so everyone can refill their coffee cups or their water bottle and stretch their legs. If there are tribal leaders or tribal designees who are present at the consultation and wish to make remarks before the end of the afternoon, please put your information in the chat. Our team is watching it, and we'll build a speaker queue from anyone we hear from in the chat. If you are a tribal leader or a tribal designee and you do us to the chat or are connected to us only by phone, I'm going to read a number for you to text to let us know that you would like to give testimony. I'll say it twice and do it slowly. If you cannot use the chat to let us know you want to give testimony, please text this phone number, 202 598 9803. I'm going to repeat that number again, 202 598 9803. Everyone, please take a few minutes break. We will reconvene at 4:15 with remaining speakers, and the formal closure of our event when it's appropriate to do that. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you, everyone. I'd like to welcome back Office for Victims of Crime Director Christina Rose, to thank again all of you who participated this afternoon. Director Rose?
Thank you so much, Catherine. And thank you to everyone again for your time today. We so value the testimony that you gave, and we look forward to your written testimony. Our colleagues from the Office on Violence Against Women have put a tribal leader notice, a Dear Tribal Leader notice of the Violence Against Women Tribal Consultation into the chat. We look forward to receiving your population certifications. And I want to thank those who gave testimony today, Councilwoman Mahal Dixon, Chief Williams, Ms. Chapin on behalf of Chief Rhonda Pitka, and Chief Walker. Thank you so much again. Catherine, back to you.
Thank you very much. It is now my pleasure to welcome Michelle Demert, who will conclude our program today. Michelle Demert is of the Tlingit Eagle Man's Foot Clan and serves currently as elected delegate. She is the former elected Chief Justice for the Central Council Tlingit and Haida Indian Tribes of Alaska and is the Law and Policy Director of the Alaska Women Native Resource Center. We are honored that Michelle has to present the closing prayer on this final day of our consultation. Ms. Demert has worked in various capacities advancing domestic violence protections for women and children since 1995. As presiding judge at the Chehalis tribe for over 10 years, she assisted with amending code provisions that provide greater protections for women and children, as well as developing a court process that holistically addresses the needs of all participants. Among her many achievements, Michelle has provided testimony during the Office on Violence Against Women and Office for Victim of Crime annual consultations as the Chief Justice of the Tlingit and Haida to bring awareness to Alaska's specific issues. She has also testified before the Senate and House committees on proposed legislation that would affect her community and tribes and villages across the nation. Ms. Demert, thank you, and please proceed when you are ready.
Goodness, Chief, thank you for the warm welcome. Thank you, Deputy Director Rose. It was wonderful to hear you today and to see you in person attend the consultation. We appreciate how busy you are and the time that you set aside to do this. And Ms. Schmidt, I just look forward to meeting you in person. It will be a lovely event. So, and I think the consultation, you know, I really appreciate the flexibility that was shown today. It looked like a sort of a fire drill, if you will, and that's how it, you know, in our COVID era Zoom, how it works. So appreciate that. So I would just ask, as I prepare to close in a good way, that we all bow our heads and if you'd like to join me in prayer, otherwise just remain silent. Dikiankau, our protecting power, and Hashagun, our ancestors. We give thanks to our federal and tribal leaders for their courage and work in addressing the difficult issues that our victims, communities, and families face, and to consider ways to provide more robust and needed services for our victims. Please give us the courage to create solutions that will continue to make a difference in the lives of our victims in our communities. Please watch out for those that testified today. Opening ourselves up and sharing the harsh reality that victims face is not easy, but it is necessary to move forward. Be near to all of those who have been touched by violence, those who have been hurt, lost their loved ones, or lost their sense of direction and security. Please place your love with them and be with them to provide steady comfort. We pray for the leadership in law enforcement who are entrusted to investigate these crimes. We pray for justice and reconciliation. Please watch over those who have perpetrated the violence. The one who is responsible for committing the immediate harm has probably had harm caused to him or her. and may be unhealed. These wounds may be unhealed. Please make us all more sensitive to the needs to protect our children from those who might harm them. Provide them with the strength and the love of our Hashagun, our ancestors. May hate be replaced with love, violence with peace, and darkness with your love. We ask you to bless each and every one on this call today, to lift them up and provide healing. We ask for blessings, peace, and comfort. Gunas Chish, ho ho. We are very thankful for your watchful presence. Dikian Kau, our protecting power. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Ms. Dent, for sharing that beautiful set of parting words and for helping us close our solicitation in a good way. Director Rose, are you ready for us to close the consultation?
I am. That was beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for attending. This concludes the 2022 consultation on the Tribal Victim Services set aside from the Crime Victims Fund. Everyone, be well and healthy. Goodbye.